Tonight, we are going to spend some quiet time in the everyday world of the past, in a period long before bottled soap, scented shampoos, or running water were common parts of daily life. This is not a story of great events or famous people, but a slow and gentle look at how ordinary men, women, and children kept themselves clean in ways that felt natural to them, using simple materials and steady routines that blended into the rhythm of medieval life. In medieval Europe, cleanliness was not understood in the same way we understand it today, yet it was not ignored. People washed, aired their clothing, swept their homes, and tended to their bodies using water, cloth, ash, herbs, and thyme. These actions were not hurried. They were repeated quietly from day to day, often without much thought, becoming part of the background of life in villages, farms, and small towns. As you listen, there is no need to remember every detail. You don't need to follow a timeline or hold on to names or dates. This story moves slowly and returns often to familiar ideas, allowing your attention to drift in and out. If your mind wanders, that is perfectly fine. If you fall asleep, the story will continue gently on its own. We will move through homes, courtyards, streets, and quiet rural spaces, noticing how water was used carefully, how clothing was aired and reused, and how cleanliness was maintained through habit rather than precision. Nothing here is urgent. Nothing is dramatic. It is simply the calm texture of everyday life, unfolding at a pace meant for rest. So take a moment to get comfortable. Let your breathing slow naturally. And as we begin, allow these simple scenes from the past to settle into the background, like a soft, steady presence, carrying you gently toward sleep. Cleanliness in the medieval world existed quietly as a daily concern rather than as a defined scientific concept. People did not speak of hygiene in technical terms, nor did they measure cleanliness by the standards familiar today. Instead, staying clean was understood through routine, habit, tradition, and availability. Over time, communities developed ways of caring for their bodies that fit naturally into the rhythms of village life, seasonal labor, and household work. These practices were rarely written down, yet they remained consistent across generations, shaped by environment and necessity. In villages and small towns, people typically began their day with basic bodily care. Faces and hands were often washed in the morning, using water drawn from nearby wells, rivers, or streams. This washing was not hurried, but neither was it elaborate. A simple wooden bowl, a cloth, and clean water were enough. The act itself was practical, intended to remove dirt from work and sleep rather than to achieve a sense of luxury. Over time, this routine remained steady, forming part of how people prepared themselves for the day ahead. Water played a central role in medieval cleanliness. It was valued, but it was also labor-intensive to collect. Because of this, water was used thoughtfully. People washed what was necessary when it was necessary. Full body washing occurred less frequently than today, but it was not absent. Bathing often followed work that left the body visibly dirty. What it was done during warmer months, when water was easier to heat and carry. In colder seasons, people adapted their habits, relying more on wiping, changing clothing, and airing garments. Clothing itself contributed significantly to cleanliness. Linen, undergarments, worn close to the skin, absorb sweat and oils. These garments were washed more often than outer clothing and served as a protective layer, keeping heavier wool garments cleaner for longer periods. Over time, this system remained reliable. Linen could be boiled, scrubbed, and dried in sunlight, which people observed helped refresh the fabric. Though the process was slow, it was familiar and repeated regularly. Soap, as a manufactured and widely available product, was uncommon for most ordinary people. Instead, cleansing relied on simple substances drawn from the natural world. Ash from hearth fires, for example, was sometimes mixed with water to create a mildly cleansing solution. Certain plants, when crushed or soaked, produced a gentle lather. These materials were not used daily by everyone, but they were known and shared within communities. Knowledge passed quietly from one household to another, remaining steady over time. Smell was another guide for cleanliness. Medieval people were attentive to odors, even if they described them differently. Strong smells were often associated with imbalance or uncleanliness, prompting washing or changing clothes. Herbs were sometimes used to freshen garments or rooms, not to mask dirt, but to restore a sense of comfort. Lavender, rosemary, and other plants were valued for their calming presence as much as for their scent. Importantly, cleanliness was not only personal but communal. Public bathhouses existed in many towns, especially earlier in the medieval period. These were social spaces where people washed, talked quietly, and rested. Though access varied by region and wealth, the presence of bathhouses shows that bathing was understood as beneficial and familiar. Over time, even as bathhouses declined in some areas, the idea of washing the body remained. Children learned cleanliness by observation. They watched adults rinse hands before meals, wash faces in the morning, and tend to clothing. These habits were not framed as lessons, but as part of daily life. Through repetition, they became normal. Over time, these small actions accumulated, maintaining a baseline of cleanliness that supported health as it was understood then. In this way, medieval cleanliness was steady rather than intense, practical rather than symbolic. It was shaped by water availability, labor demands, and tradition. Though it lacked modern soap and scientific explanation, it remained effective within its context. People continued these practices quietly, day after day, guided by experience and necessity rather than instruction. Water formed the foundation of all medieval cleaning practices. Without modern plumbing, people relied on nearby sources that shaped how and when washing occurred. Wells stood at the center of many villages, providing water that was shared and carefully managed. Rivers and streams offered additional access, particularly for washing clothing, tools, and sometimes the body. These sources were woven into daily routines, influencing cleanliness in subtle but consistent ways. Fetching water required effort. Buckets had to be lowered into wells, lifted, and carried back to homes. Because of this labor, water was rarely wasted. People became skilled at using small amounts effectively. A basin of water could serve multiple purposes, beginning with washing hands or faces and ending with cleaning tools or floors. Over time, this careful use of water became second nature, shaping habits that balanced cleanliness with conservation. Washing hands held particular importance. Hands were constantly exposed to dirt through farming, cooking, and animal care. Before meals and food preparation, hands were often rinsed. This practice was both practical and customary. Even without understanding germs, people recognized that clean hands were associated with comfort and well-being. Over time, this habit remained consistent across households, passed down quietly. Full body washing depended on circumstance. In warmer months, people might bathe in rivers or use large wooden tubs at home. Water would be heated over a fire, poured into the tub, and used carefully. Bathing was not rushed. It was a slow process, often shared among family members, with water reused in stages. While this may seem limited, it was effective within the constraints of daily life. In colder seasons, bathing became less frequent, but washing did not disappear. People focused on areas that became dirty most easily, such as hands, faces, feet, and hair. Clothes dampened with warm water were used to wipe the body. Clothing was aired near fires or outdoors when possible, allowing moisture and odors to fade. Over time, these adaptations allowed people to remain comfortable even when full baths were impracticable. Rivers served as important spaces for laundering clothes. Linen garments were taken to the water's edge, soaked, scrubbed against stones or wooden boards, and rinsed thoroughly. This work was often done communally, with several people washing together. The rhythm of scrubbing and rinsing was steady and unhurried. Over time, this routine became a familiar part of village life, tied to specific days or seasons. Water quality varied, and people were aware of it. Clear, flowing water was preferred for washing, while stagnant water was avoided when possible. This awareness was based on observation rather than theory. Over time, communities learned which sources were best suited for cleaning, cooking, or drinking. These choices shaped health and comfort in subtle ways. Hair washing followed similar principles. Water alone was often used, sometimes combined with herbal rinses made from plants believed to strengthen or refresh the hair. These rinses were mild and used occasionally. Hair was also brushed regularly, which removed dirt and distributed natural oils. Over time, this simple care maintained cleanliness without the need for modern products. Through all of this, water remained central. It was the most important cleaning resource, used thoughtfully and repeatedly. Though access required effort, people adapted their habits accordingly. Over time, these practices remained stable, forming the quiet foundation of medieval cleanliness, sustained by routine rather than innovation. In the medieval world, clothing played a central role in staying clean, often more important than washing the body itself. People understood, through long experience, that garments worn closest to the skin absorbed sweat, oils, and everyday grime. By managing these layers carefully, they could remain comfortable and presentable without frequent full-body bathing. Over time, This system became a quiet foundation of cleanliness, practiced daily without much reflection. Most people wore linen undergarments directly against the skin. Linen was valued because it could be washed thoroughly and tolerated heat and scrubbing better than wool. These garments included shirts, shifts, and undertunics, worn beneath heavier outer layers. Because linen absorbed moisture, it protected outer clothing from becoming dirty too quickly. Over time, people learned that keeping the linen clean made the whole body feel cleaner. Washing linen was a regular task. These garments were removed, soaked in water, and scrubbed by hand. Sometimes they were boiled, especially if they had become heavily soiled. Boiling linen not only removed visible dirt, but also refreshed the fabric. After washing, garments were rinsed and laid out to dry, often in sunlight. People noticed that sun and air helped restore freshness, even if they did not describe the process in scientific terms. Outer garments, usually made of wool, were washed far less often. Wool was heavy, slow to dry, and more difficult to clean. Instead of frequent washing, wool clothing was aired. Garments were hung outside or near fires, allowing moisture and odors to fade. Brushing wool also helped remove surface dirt. Over time, these methods preserved clothing while maintaining a reasonable level of cleanliness. Changing clothes was another important habit. Even if bathing was infrequent, people changed their linen regularly when possible. This simple act removed dirt from contact with the skin. Over time, the rhythm of changing garments became closely tied to household routines, washing days, and the availability of water and labor. Though not everyone could change as often as they wished, the intention remained. Footwear also required attention. Shoes were typically made of leather and worn daily in muddy or dusty conditions. While shoes were not washed like clothing, they were cleaned by scraping off dirt and allowing them to dry properly. Feet themselves were washed when water allowed, especially after long days of work. Over time, this care prevented discomfort and maintained mobility. Children's clothing followed the same principles. Young garments were often handed down and altered, but linen layers remained essential. Parents washed children's undergarments regularly, especially after play or work. Through observation, children learned the importance of clean clothing, not as a lesson, but as part of daily life. In this way, cleanliness was maintained through fabric and routine rather than constant washing of skin. Clothing absorbed dirt so the body did not have to. Over time, this system remained reliable and familiar, forming a quiet balance between practicality and comfort in medieval life. Without modern soap, medieval people relied on simple substances drawn from their surroundings to aid in cleaning. These materials were not used with precision or formula, but with familiarity built over generations. Ash, plants, and water formed the basis of mild cleansing methods that were gentle, accessible, and effective within their limits. Over time, these practices remained steady, guided by experience rather than experimentation. Wood ash was one of the most common materials used for cleaning. Collected from hearth fires, ash was abundant in every household. When mixed with water, it created a mildly alkaline solution that could loosen dirt and grease. This mixture was used mainly for washing clothes, though sometimes it was applied carefully to hands or tools. People understood its strength and adjusted use accordingly, avoiding irritation through moderation. Certain plants were also known for their cleansing properties. Some leaves and roots, when crushed or soaked, produced a slight lather. These plants were gathered locally and used occasionally rather than daily. Their use was not widespread in every household, but the knowledge existed and was shared quietly. Over time, these plant-based methods remained part of communal understanding. Hair washing sometimes involved herbal rinses. Infusions made from plants were poured over the hair to refresh it and help remove dirt. These rinses were mild and used infrequently. More often, hair was kept clean through brushing and covering. Head coverings protected hair from dust, while brushing removed debris and distributed natural oils. Over time, this care maintained comfort and order. For the body, water alone was usually sufficient. When substances were added, they were used sparingly. People were attentive to how their skin reacted and adjusted practices accordingly. This cautious approach prevented harm and maintained balance. Over time, these habits became ingrained, repeated quietly across generations. Tools and household items were also cleaned using ash and water. Wooden bowls, benches, and surfaces were scrubbed regularly. Keeping the household clean contributed to overall comfort and order. Though these tasks were routine, they supported daily life in subtle ways. These simple cleansing substances did not promise perfection. Instead, they offered practicality. Over time, people relied on them consistently, maintaining cleanliness within the boundaries of their environment. Without modern soap, they achieved a steady balance, shaped by observation, repetition, and restraint. Bathing in the medieval period was shaped by space, effort, and intention rather than by frequency. People did not bathe daily in the way that is common today, but they did wash their bodies when circumstances allowed. Bathing was understood as a beneficial and familiar practice, even if it required planning and labor. Over time, it remained part of life, adjusted to season, weather, and available resources. Within households, bathing usually took place using wooden tubs. These tubs were not permanent fixtures, but practical objects brought out when needed. Water had to be collected and heated over a fire, a process that took time. Because of this effort, bathing was approached calmly, without haste. When the tub was ready, people washed slowly, often sitting or standing quietly, using cloths and water rather than vigorous scrubbing. Bath water was used carefully. In many homes, one tub of water served multiple people, starting with those who needed it most. The water might be refreshed with additional warm water as needed, but it was not discarded lightly. This sharing was practical and accepted. Over time, it shaped bathing into a communal household activity rather than a private ritual. In towns and some villages, public bathhouses provided another option. These spaces existed earlier in the medieval period and were valued for cleanliness and relaxation. People visited bathhouses not only to wash, but also to rest and talk quietly. Bathing there was unhurried, with warm water and a sense of routine. Over time, The presence of bathhouses reinforced the idea that washing the body was normal and beneficial. Seasonal changes influenced bathing habits. During warmer months, rivers and streams offered natural bathing places. People bathed in shallow water, away from strong currents. This practice was refreshing and required little preparation. In colder months, bathing became less frequent, but washing continued in smaller ways. People adapted, focusing on comfort rather than strict schedules. Modesty guided bathing practices. Clothing or cloths were used to cover the body when appropriate, especially in shared spaces. These customs were widely understood and followed without question. Over time, they maintained social comfort and order. Bathing was not dramatic or symbolic. It was quiet, practical, and steady. People bathed to feel comfortable, to remove visible dirt, and to restore a sense of balance. Over time, this gentle approach remained consistent, supporting cleanliness without excess. In daily life, attention was often directed toward the parts of the body most exposed to dirt. Hands and faces received the most frequent washing, as they were constantly visible and involved in work, eating, and social interaction. This focus reflected practical understanding rather than abstract hygiene. Over time, it shaped habits that maintained a sense of order and comfort. Hands were washed many times throughout the day. After working in fields, tending animals, or handling food, people rinsed their hands when water was available. This practice was common before meals and food preparation. Even without knowledge of germs, people recognized that clean hands felt better and reduced discomfort. Over time, this habit remained steady across households. Faces were washed in the morning and sometimes in the evening. A simple basin of water and a cloth were sufficient. Washing the face removed sleep, dust, and sweat. It also marked transitions in the day, from rest to work and back again. Over time, this routine became a quiet anchor in daily life. Feet, though less visible, also required care. Long hours of walking and standing made foot washing important when possible. People washed their feet after travel or heavy labor, especially in warmer weather. This practice relieved discomfort and prevented sores. Over time, it became part of seasonal routines. Hair care focused more on maintenance than washing. Hair was brushed regularly, often daily, to remove dirt and keep it orderly. Head coverings protected hair from dust and sun. Washing occurred occasionally, using water or mild herbal rinses. Over time, this balanced approach maintained cleanliness without excess. Children learned these habits early. They watched adults wash hands, faces, and tools. Through repetition, these actions became familiar and expected. Over time, they formed the foundation of personal care. By focusing on visible cleanliness, medieval people maintained social comfort and personal well-being. These simple acts, repeated quietly, supported daily life. Over time, they remained reliable, steady, and effective within their context. In the absence of modern perfumes and chemical cleaners, medieval people relied heavily on their senses to judge cleanliness, especially the sense of smell. Odor was not ignored or accepted as inevitable. Instead, It served as a quiet signal that something required attention. Over time, people developed habits that managed smell through air, fabric, and simple natural materials, maintaining comfort in daily life. Fresh air was considered essential. Homes were aired whenever weather allowed, with doors opened during the day to let stale air drift out. This practice was not described as cleansing in a technical sense, but it was understood that fresh air made spaces more comfortable. Over time, airing rooms became part of daily routine, especially after cooking, sleeping, or washing clothes indoors. Clothing absorbs smells as well as dirt. Wool garments, in particular, held odors from work, smoke, and the body. Rather than washing these heavy items frequently, people relied on airing. Garments were hung outside or near doorways, where moving air gradually reduced odors. Over time, this method proved effective and preserved clothing. Herbs played a gentle role in managing smell. Bundles of dried plants were sometimes placed in rooms, chests, or among clothing. These herbs were valued not for strong fragrance, but for their subtle presence. Over time, their use remained modest, supporting comfort rather than overwhelming the senses. Bedding was also aired regularly. Straw mattresses and blankets were taken outside when possible, allowing moisture and odors to fade. This practice refreshed sleeping spaces and improved comfort. Over time, it became a familiar seasonal task. Personal scent was managed through washing, changing linen, and avoiding excess moisture. People recognized that sweat trapped against the skin led to discomfort. By keeping undergarments clean and dry, they reduced odor naturally. Over time, this balance maintained personal comfort without the need for strong scents. In this way, smell guided cleanliness gently. It prompted action without urgency, shaping habits that remained steady over generations. These practices worked quietly, supporting daily life through awareness rather than instruction. Hair care in the medieval period was deliberate and slow, shaped more by routine than by products. People understood their hair required attention to remain comfortable and orderly. Without frequent washing, they relied on brushing, covering, and occasional rinsing. Over time, this approach proved sufficient within the rhythms of daily life. Combs were common household items. Made of wood or bone, they were used to remove dirt and keep hair smooth. Combing also helped distribute natural oils along the hair, maintaining softness and reducing dryness. Over time, regular combing became one of the most important aspects of hair cleanliness. Head coverings served a practical purpose. Caps, veils, and hoods protected hair from dust, wind, and sun. They also absorbed sweat, reducing the need for frequent washing. These coverings were aired and washed as needed, maintaining cleanliness indirectly. Over time, this system balanced protection and comfort. Hair washing occurred occasionally, often using water alone. In some cases, mild herbal rinses were used. These rinses were gentle and infrequent. People paid attention to how their hair responded, adjusting practices accordingly. Over time, this cautious approach prevented damage and maintained order. Children's hair was cared for similarly. Parents combed hair regularly and washed it when necessary. Through this care, children learned patience and routine. Over time, these habits became familiar and calming. Hair was not styled for display. It was kept tidy for comfort and practicality. This quiet care reflected a broader approach to cleanliness, one that valued steadiness over intensity. Over time, these practices remained consistent, supporting daily life without excess. Washing clothing in the medieval world was not a small or casual task. It required time, physical effort, and planning, and because of this, laundering became a rhythm rather than a daily occurrence. Instead of constant washing, people organized their work around specific days or seasons, allowing cleanliness to be maintained gradually and consistently over time. This rhythm shaped how garments were cared for and how households functioned. Laundering often took place near reliable water sources. Rivers, streams, and large communal wells provided the space and water needed for soaking and rinsing fabric. People carried bundles of linen garments, sometimes tied together, and settled into familiar spots along the water's edge. The process was steady and repetitive, involving soaking, rubbing, and rinsing rather than aggressive scrubbing. Over time, these motions became habitual, passed from one generation to the next. Linen garments received the most attention. Because linen absorbed sweat and oils from the body, it required regular washing. These garments were soaked first, loosening dirt. They were then rubbed by hand or against smooth stones or wooden boards. This work was slow but effective. Over time, people learned how much pressure fabric could tolerate without damage, preserving garments while cleaning them thoroughly. Ash-based solutions were sometimes used during laundering. Water mixed with ash helped break down grease and stains, especially on heavily soiled clothing. This mixture was rinsed out carefully to avoid residue. People understood the balance required, using enough to clean without harming the fabric. Over time, this knowledge remained steady, refined through repeated use rather than written instruction. Laundering was often a communal activity. Several people worked side by side, each focused on their own garments while sharing space and time. Conversation, when it occurred, was calm and unhurried. The sound of water and fabric dominated the scene. Over time, these shared moments reinforced community bonds without drawing attention to themselves. Drying clothing was just as important as washing. Clean garments were laid over bushes, wooden frames, or ropes, allowing air and sunlight to do their work. People observed that sunlight refreshed fabric and reduced lingering odors. Over time, drying became an essential part of cleanliness, not merely a final step. Outer wool garments were treated differently. Instead of frequent washing, they were aired and brushed. This preserved the structure of the fabric and prevented shrinkage. Over time, people learned which garments required water and which benefited more from air and patience. Children participated in laundering from an early age, carrying small items or assisting with drying. Through this involvement, they absorbed the rhythm of work and care. Over time, laundering days became familiar markers in the passage of weeks and seasons. In this way, cleanliness was sustained through repetition rather than intensity. Laundering was not rushed or perfected. It was steady, reliable, and woven into the broader pattern of life. Over time, this approach maintained comfort and order without excess. Cleanliness in the medieval period extended beyond the body and clothing into the spaces where people lived. Homes were not sealed or insulated in modern ways, and because of this, dirt entered easily. Dust, ash, mud, and debris were part of daily life. Rather than attempting to eliminate these elements entirely, people focused on managing them steadily and consistently. Floors were typically made of packed earth or rough wooden planks. These surfaces were swept regularly using simple brooms made from bundled twigs or straw. Sweeping removed loose dirt and debris, keeping living spaces functional and comfortable. Over time, this task became a daily habit, often performed in the morning or evening. Ash from hearth fires accumulated quickly. Fireplaces were central to cooking and heating, and ash had to be removed to maintain airflow and safety. Ash was collected carefully and reused for cleaning or gardening. This reuse reduced waste and supported other household tasks. Over time, managing ash became an ordinary and essential part of cleanliness. Furniture was simple and minimal. Tables, benches, and stools were wiped with damp cloths to remove dirt and food residue. Because furniture was often made of unfinished wood, it absorbed moisture easily. People used water sparingly, allowing surfaces to dry fully. Over time, this careful approach preserved household items and maintained order. Cooking areas received particular attention. Food preparation required clean surfaces. Even if the understanding of cleanliness differed from modern standards, utensils were rinsed after use, pots were scrubbed, and surfaces were cleared of scraps. Over time, these habits reduced spillage and discomfort. Sleeping areas were also tended regularly. Straw mattresses were shaken, aired, and replaced as needed. Blankets were aired outdoors, allowing moisture and odor to fade. These practices refreshed sleeping spaces and improved rest. Over time, they became familiar seasonal routines. Animals often lived close to humans, especially in rural households. Managing animal presence required regular cleaning to prevent buildup of waste. Floors were swept, bedding was changed, and spaces were aired. Over time, this balance allowed people and animals to coexist comfortably. Children learned household care by observation. Sweeping, wiping, and airing were not formal lessons, but daily actions. Over time, these tasks became part of normal life, shaping attitudes toward cleanliness and responsibility. Household cleanliness was not about perfection. It was about maintaining balance and comfort within the limits of materials and labor. Over time, steady care supported health and order quietly, without drawing attention or requiring explanation. Seasonal change shaped nearly every aspect of medieval life, and cleanliness was no exception. People adjusted their washing and cleaning practices slowly and thoughtfully as weather shifted throughout the year. These changes were not abrupt, nor were they guided by strict rules. Instead, they followed long-established patterns that balanced comfort, effort, and availability. Over time, seasonal adaptation became an expected and familiar part of staying clean. During warmer months, water was easier to access and use. Rivers flowed steadily, days were longer, and heating water required less fuel. As a result, bathing and washing occurred more often. People took advantage of warm weather to wash clothing thoroughly, air bedding, and clean household spaces more deeply. These tasks were not rushed, but spread across days and weeks, allowing work to continue without strain. Summer also allowed for more frequent airing. Clothing, bedding, and even furniture were brought outside when possible. Sunlight and moving air refreshed fabrics and living spaces. People observed that items left outdoors felt lighter and more comfortable afterward. Over time, this practice became a seasonal expectation, repeated each year as weather allowed. In contrast, colder months required restraint. Water froze more easily, days were shorter, and fuel was valuable. Full bathing became less common, but cleanliness did not disappear. Instead, people focused on targeted washing. Hands, faces, and feet continued to be washed when possible. Linen garments were changed and washed carefully, even if less frequently. Over time, this adaptation maintained comfort without exhausting resources. Winter also brought changes in household cleaning. Floors were swept regularly, but washing surfaces with water was done sparingly to avoid dampness. Bedding was aired near fires rather than outdoors. Ash and debris accumulated more quickly due to increased indoor activity, requiring steady attention. Over time, people adjusted their routines naturally, maintaining balance between cleanliness and warmth. Spring marked a gradual return to more intensive cleaning. As weather improved, people washed heavier garments, refreshed living spaces, and replaced worn bedding. This transition was not sudden. Tasks were spread out, allowing households to adapt without strain. Over time, spring cleaning became a quiet renewal rather than a dramatic event. Children learned these seasonal rhythms early. They observed changes in routine and participated in tasks appropriate to their age. Through repetition, they understood that cleanliness followed the year's cycle. Over time, this awareness became part of their understanding of daily life. Seasonal adaptation allowed medieval people to remain clean within their environment. Rather than resisting conditions, they worked with them. Over time, this approach provided stability, comfort, and continuity, supporting daily life without excess effort or expectation. Medieval people did not understand health through modern science, but they observed patterns in comfort, illness, and recovery. Cleanliness, as they practiced it, was closely tied to these observations. Though they did not speak of bacteria or infection, they noticed that certain habits supported well-being over time. This awareness shaped how cleaning practices were maintained and passed on. People observed that dirty clothing caused discomfort. Linen worn too long became heavy and unpleasant, leading to irritation. Changing and washing garments restored comfort. Over time, this connection between clean clothing and well-being became widely accepted. It did not require explanation. It was felt through experience. Similarly, washing hands before eating became associated with ease and satisfaction. Meals felt more pleasant when hands were clean. Though this practice was not framed as disease prevention, it remained consistent. Over time, Such habits reduced minor ailments and discomfort, reinforcing their value. Living spaces also influenced health. Stale air, damp bedding, and accumulated waste led to discomfort and illness. By airing rooms, cleaning surfaces, and managing waste, people improved their surroundings. Over time, these practices reduced unpleasant conditions and supported rest. Bathing, when it occurred, was associated with relief. Warm water eased sore muscles and refreshed the body. People noticed improved comfort after bathing, especially following heavy labor. Over time, this understanding supported the continued use of bathing when possible. Herbs used for freshness also contributed to comfort. Certain plants were believed to support balance and calm. While their effects were not measured, their presence was valued. Over time, these gentle additions became part of household care. Children's health was closely watched. Parents adjusted cleaning practices when children became ill, washing bedding and clothing more carefully. Over time, these responses reflected an intuitive connection between cleanliness and recovery. Cleanliness was not seen as a cure, but as support. It worked quietly, reducing strain on the body and mind. Over time, medieval people relied on observation rather than theory, maintaining habits that promoted comfort and stability within their understanding of the world. Cleanliness in the medieval world was not only a private matter, it also played a quiet role in social life, shaping how people interacted with one another in shared spaces. Though expectations differed from modern standards, people were attentive to appearance, smell, and comfort when gathering with others. Over time, these considerations influenced daily routines and reinforced shared habits within communities. When people gathered for work, worship, or market days, they prepared themselves in simple ways. Faces and hands were washed, hair was combed, and clean or freshly aired garments were chosen when possible. These actions were not driven by vanity, but by a desire to be comfortable among others. Over time, such preparation became customary, signaling respect and belonging rather than status. Markets brought together people from surrounding areas, often after long journeys. Washing before attending helped remove the dust of travel and made social interaction more pleasant. Even when full bathing was not possible, wiping the face and changing linen made a noticeable difference. Over time, these small efforts supported smoother social exchange. Shared meals also encouraged cleanliness. Eating together was common, and clean hands were expected. People rinsed their hands before sitting down, using water provided in bowls or pitchers. This ritual, repeated daily, reinforced the connection between cleanliness and communal comfort. Over time, it became an unspoken rule. Public spaces required attention as well. Streets were swept, waste was removed, and water was directed away from living areas. Though these efforts were imperfect, they reflected a shared responsibility for cleanliness. Over time, communities developed routines that balanced labor and necessity. Bathhouses, where they existed, served as social centers as much as places of washing. People met, spoke quietly, and rested. Cleanliness here supported relaxation and social connection. Over time, These spaces reinforced the idea that washing was normal and beneficial. Children absorbed social expectations through observation. They learned when to wash, change clothes, and prepare for gatherings. Over time, these lessons became part of their understanding of community life. In this way, cleanliness supported social harmony. It reduced discomfort, eased interaction, and maintained order. Over time, these quiet practices strengthened communal bonds without drawing attention to themselves. The practices that supported cleanliness in medieval life were rarely written down. Instead, they were passed quietly from one generation to the next through observation and routine. Children learned by watching adults wash air, clothing, and care for living spaces. Over time, these actions became familiar and expected, forming a shared understanding of daily care. Mothers, fathers, and elders demonstrated how to manage water, fabric, and time. They showed when to wash linen, how to air wool, and how to clean tools. These lessons were not formal. They unfolded gradually, repeated across days and seasons. Over time, repetition replaced explanation. Household routines varied slightly from place to place, shaped by climate and resources, yet the underlying principles remained similar. Cleanliness was maintained through balance rather than excess. Over time, this consistency allowed practices to endure. Mistakes were corrected gently. If a garment was damaged through improper washing, the lesson was remembered. Over time, experience refined technique. This slow refinement ensured that practices remained effective without sudden change. Community observation reinforced learning. People noticed how others managed their homes and adapted useful methods. Over time, shared practices emerged, forming a quiet standard. These traditions endured because they fit daily life. They required no special tools or knowledge beyond what was available. Over time, they became part of the rhythm of living, sustained through continuity rather than instruction. Cleanliness, in this sense, was cultural knowledge. It flowed steadily through generations, shaped by habit and necessity. Over time, it remained reliable, supporting comfort and order in medieval life. Modern ideas about medieval life often suggest that people of the past lived without concern for cleanliness, surrounded by constant dirt and disorder. This image, repeated over time, overlooks the quieter reality of daily care that shaped medieval routines. While standards differed from those of the present, the intention to remain clean and comfortable was real and persistent. Over time, this intention expressed itself through small, repeated actions rather than dramatic efforts. Medieval people did not pursue cleanliness as an abstract ideal. Instead, they responded to immediate needs. When clothing became uncomfortable, it was washed or changed. When living spaces felt stale, they were aired and swept. When the body felt heavy with dirt or sweat, it was washed with water. These responses were practical and rooted in experience rather than belief. Over time, they formed a stable system that supported daily life. The absence of modern soap did not mean the absence of cleansing. Water, ash, plants, and cloth provided sufficient means to remove dirt and maintain comfort. People understood the limits of these materials and used them accordingly. Over time, restraint became part of the practice, preventing harm and preserving resources. Cleanliness also existed within limits set by labor. Fetching water, heating it, and washing garments required time and effort. Because of this, people prioritized what mattered most. Linen, undergarments, hands, faces, and food spaces received attention first. Over time, this prioritization maintained well-being without overwhelming households. The rhythm of cleaning was steady rather than intense. Tasks were spread across days and seasons, allowing work to continue alongside farming, crafting, and family care. Over time, this balance prevented exhaustion and ensured consistency. Smell, comfort, and appearance guided decisions. These senses provided immediate feedback. When something felt wrong, it was addressed. Over time, this sensory awareness replaced abstract rules. By understanding medieval cleanliness through this lens, a clearer picture emerges. People were not indifferent to dirt. They were attentive within their means. Over time, their practices endured because they worked quietly and reliably, supporting life without drawing attention to themselves. At its core, medieval cleanliness was not about progress or improvement. It was about continuity. Practices remained stable because they fit the environment, resources, and rhythms of life. Over time, these practices supported comfort, health, and social order without requiring innovation. Each generation inherited a set of habits shaped by those before them. These habits were adjusted slightly as conditions changed, but their foundation remained the same. Water was used carefully, clothing was layered thoughtfully, living spaces were tended regularly. Over time, this continuity provided reliability. Cleanliness did not seek perfection. It sought balance. People accepted that dirt was part of life, but they also knew how to manage it. Over time, this acceptance reduced anxiety and supported calm. In daily routines, cleanliness blended seamlessly with other tasks. Washing, airing, sweeping, and changing garments were not separate from life. They were life. Over time, this integration allowed care to continue without effort or emphasis. When viewed as a whole, medieval cleanliness appears less as a lack and more as a different expression. Without modern products, people relied on observation, repetition, and moderation. Over time, these methods sustained communities quietly. This quiet persistence is what allowed cleanliness to endure. It required no explanation and no urgency. It continued simply because it worked. Over time, it became part of the background of life, steady and unobtrusive, much like the rhythms of sleep and waking that framed each day. In medieval life, cleanliness was closely tied to labor, and through that connection, it developed a distinct character. Because every act of cleaning required physical effort, people approached it with care and moderation. Water had to be drawn, carried, and sometimes heated. Cloth had to be scrubbed by hand. Floors had to be swept slowly and repeatedly. These realities shaped a mindset in which gentle, steady effort was preferred over intensity. Over time, this approach became deeply ingrained. The act of fetching water itself influenced cleaning habits. Buckets were heavy, wells were deep, and distance mattered. People learned to plan their use of water thoughtfully. A basin of water was often used for several purposes in sequence, beginning with washing hands or faces, then continuing with cleaning tools or wiping surfaces. Over time, this careful sequencing reduced waste and conserved energy, allowing cleanliness to be maintained without exhaustion. Heating water required fuel, usually wood, which also demanded labor to gather and prepare. Because fuel was valuable, hot water was used intentionally. Bathing, laundering, and deep cleaning were planned around availability. Over time, people developed patience, accepting that some tasks would wait until conditions were favorable. This patience supported a calm rhythm of care rather than urgency. Cleaning itself was physical but measured. Scrubbing linen garments required strength, yet it was done slowly to avoid damage. Sweeping floors involved repeated motions that became familiar and almost meditative. Over time, these movements blended into daily life, performed without strain or haste. The body learned the work, and the work shaped the body in return. Because cleaning took effort, people focused on what mattered most. Areas of direct contact received attention first. Clothing touching the skin, hands used for eating, and spaces where food was prepared were prioritized. Over time, this focus maintained comfort and reduced problems without attempting total control over the environment. Rest was also part of this system. Cleaning tasks were balanced with periods of pause. Garments were left to soak, rooms were aired slowly, and bedding was refreshed over time rather than all at once. Over time, this pacing prevented fatigue and allowed care to continue consistently. Children learned not only techniques but attitudes. They observed adults working steadily, without complaint or urgency. Cleaning was neither praised nor resented. It was simply done. Over time, this attitude shaped how the next generation approached care, reinforcing calm and continuity. In this way, labor shaped cleanliness into something gentle and sustainable. Effort was respected, resources were valued, and tasks were approached with patience. Over time, this balance allowed medieval people to remain clean within their means, supporting daily life without strain or excess. One of the most defining features of medieval cleanliness was the absence of urgency. People did not rush to clean, nor did they seek constant renewal. Instead, they accepted a degree of imperfection as natural. Dirt accumulated slowly and was removed gradually. This acceptance created an environment of calm rather than anxiety, allowing daily life to proceed without constant correction. Living spaces were never entirely free of dust, ash, or debris. Rather than striving for spotless conditions, people maintained order through regular attention. Sweeping removed what was loose. Wiping cleared surfaces that were used often. Over time, these small acts prevented disorder from becoming overwhelming. Cleanliness was maintained through presence rather than control. The body was treated similarly. Washing occurred when needed, not according to strict schedules. People responded to discomfort, visible dirt, or seasonal change. Over time, this responsiveness created a balance between neglect and excess. The body was cared for without being scrutinized. Clothing followed this pattern as well. Garments were not washed until they required it. Linen absorbed wear and was cleaned when it became heavy or unpleasant. Wool was aired patiently. Over time, this approach preserved clothing and reduced labor, supporting sustainability. This lack of urgency extended to social expectations. People did not expect perfection from one another. Signs of work and daily life were normal. Cleanliness signaled care, not status. Over time, this understanding reduced pressure and maintained harmony. Order emerged naturally from routine. Tasks repeated daily or weekly created structure without rigidity. Floors were swept, water was fetched, garments were changed. Over time, these actions formed a background rhythm that supported life quietly. Even illness and hardship did not entirely disrupt this system. When resources were limited, people adjusted rather than abandoned care. They washed what they could, aired what was possible, and waited patiently for better conditions. Over time, this resilience preserved stability. In this way, medieval cleanliness existed without obsession. It was neither ignored nor pursued relentlessly. It remained steady, adaptable, and calm. Over time, this approach supported not only physical comfort, but also mental ease, allowing people to live within their environment without constant concern. In medieval life, cleanliness was closely associated with comfort rather than control. People did not attempt to dominate their surroundings or their bodies through constant intervention. Instead, they sought a state of ease, where daily activities could continue without distraction or discomfort. Over time, this understanding shaped a gentle approach to care that fit naturally into everyday life. Comfort guided decisions about washing and cleaning. When skin felt tight or heavy with sweat, water was used. When clothing rubbed or weighed down the body, it was changed or washed. When rooms felt stale or unpleasant, doors were opened and floors swept. These actions were not performed to achieve an ideal condition, but to restore balance. Over time, this balance became familiar and reliable. The materials people used supported this approach. Linen, wool, wood, and clay responded best to moderate care. Excessive washing damaged fabric. Too much water warped wood. Too much scrubbing wore surfaces down. Over time, people learned that restraint preserved both comfort and resources. Cleanliness, therefore, was practiced with sensitivity rather than force. The body itself was treated with similar respect. Skin was not stripped or scented aggressively. Hair was not washed constantly. Instead, natural oils were allowed to remain, providing protection and softness. Over time, this gentler treatment reduced irritation and supported long-term comfort. Living spaces reflected the same principle. Homes were tidy enough to function well, but not emptied of all signs of life. Tools remained within reach. Fires left ash. Floors bore traces of work. Over time, this acceptance allowed homes to feel lived in rather than controlled. This approach also shaped emotional life. Without pressure to maintain perfection, people experienced less anxiety around cleanliness. Tasks were completed when needed, then set aside. Over time, this rhythm allowed attention to shift toward work, family, and rest without constant concern. Children absorbed this understanding naturally. They learned that care was about feeling well rather than appearing flawless. Over time, this lesson supported patience and calm. By treating cleanliness as a means of comfort rather than control, medieval people maintained well-being quietly. Their practices did not aim to eliminate every trace of dirt, but to keep life moving smoothly. Over time, this approach proved sustainable, allowing care to continue without strain or excess. When viewed as a whole, medieval cleanliness emerges as a quiet system shaped by environment, labor, and habit. It did not depend on invention or constant change. Instead, it endured because it fit the realities of daily life. Over time, this system supported generations without requiring explanation or reform. Water remained central, used carefully and respectfully. Clothing served as both protection and filter, absorbing dirt so the body could remain comfortable. Living spaces were tended through regular, gentle attention. These elements worked together, forming a balanced whole. Over time, their interaction created stability. Knowledge passed through observation rather than instruction. Children learned by watching adults wash, air, and sweep. These actions were repeated until they became natural. Over time, this transmission preserved practices without the need for written rules. Seasonal rhythms guided effort. Warm months allowed for deeper cleaning. Cold months encouraged restraint and focus. Over time, this alignment with nature reduced strain and supported continuity. The absence of modern soap did not result in neglect. Instead, it encouraged awareness. People noticed how their bodies, clothing, and homes responded to care. Over time, this attentiveness replaced abstraction, grounding cleanliness in lived experience. Importantly, this system allowed for rest. Cleaning tasks were spaced out, shared, and paced. They did not dominate life. Over time, this balance supported both physical comfort and mental calm. As centuries passed, these practices evolved slowly, but their foundation remained. They endured because they worked. They required no urgency, no perfection, and no constant improvement. Over time, they became part of the background of life, steady and unobtrusive. In this quiet endurance lies their strength. Medieval cleanliness was not defined by what it lacked, but by how well it suited its world. Over time, it remained sufficient, gentle, and sustainable, supporting daily life in a way that allowed people to live, work, and rest without disturbance.